this on?
You did. Which means by now you have likely realised the watertight excellence of Shaun of the Dead. Or maybe you haven't. Allow me to enlighten you. There is the montages, the crash zoom edits, the choreographed transitions, the exaggerated sound effects, the match cuts, and the prophetic storytelling.
A bite of the king's head, couple of the little princess, we'll stagger back in. Back at the bar for Shaun's, how's that for a slice of fried gold?
But these are just parts of Edgar Wright's style, I hear you say. There are even better transitions in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. There are match cuts in The World's End. There are exaggerated sound effects in all of Wright's movies. And there are crash zoom edits in Hot Fuzz. And the prophetic storytelling goes further, by showing character change. And in Baby Driver, the montages have evolved into high-octane chase scenes. All of which is true. Shaun of the Dead was Wright's directorial debut, the blossoming of his style. The refinement came later. So what makes Shaun of the Dead such a special debut? To look forwards for an answer, we must look back at Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright's inspirations.
Talk to me.
But with Raising Arizona, I started to see how the camera work and the performance style and the writing worked together in such a way that it created a kind of a much more 3D kind of comedy, whereby you were there were jokes in the way that the camera moved, and there were jokes in the way that the camera moved rhymed with itself, like thematically and structurally, and the way that the script repeated a lot of what you see and what I went on to do with Edgar. Certainly, it's Shaun of the Dead. You know, the You've Got Red on You. Okay, then is Raising Arizona's You've Got Red on You. The idea of, you know, sort of creating cyclical dialogue and rhyming scenes with each other. That all comes from this film, you know.
Okay then.
The big giveaways from Simon Pegg's words on Raising Arizona are the versatility of the camera, the cyclical dialogue, and the rhyming filmmaking. So today, I'm going to examine how Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright took these notions as inspiration to not only create effective comedy, but to enhance character and toy with Shaun of the Dead's two polarising genres, horror and comedy, and how they, by using the Coen brothers' blueprint, managed to create a trilogy not bound by plot, but by cinematic poetry. Edgar Wright's directorial style is synonymous with his unique use of the camera. How things enter the frame, how they leave the frame, his transitions, and so on. In his films, the camera possesses a dynamism, whereby its motion anchors us throughout the story in a similar way a narrator carries us through the space and time of a film. This dynamism took inspiration from the camera's chaotic omnipresence in Raising Arizona. This dynamism is part of Edgar Wright's style. But great films aren't defined by style alone. If style reigns supreme in a film, then that film will remain two-dimensional. But Pegg and Wright wanted to go beyond the formula for generic comedies, beyond what Pegg described as.
These days, a lot of comedy is just a question of you get some capable director to point the camera at funny people who improvise, and then in the edit they cobble together some piece of shit which is kind of funny, but if you forget the next day. I'm talking about my films.
What Pegg, and by extension Wright too, specified a desire for was a three-dimensional comedy.
Perfect.
So, how did they achieve that? Depth, specifically character depth. The main player is Shaun, the everyman with daddy issues, a dead-end job, an unfulfilled relationship, and a pub that pursues him in every night. He's a guy that needs to evolve.
Player 2 has entered the game.
Then we have Liz, his girlfriend, who wants more out of life and is reaching a breaking point in their Groundhog Day relationship. And finally, we have Ed, the Cornetto-loving, Carlin-sipping, game-playing slob who refuses to grow up and drag Shaun down with him. In order to establish these characters and their relationships, Wright and cinematographer David Dunlap threw dynamism out the window. Instead, they created a pattern of symmetrical shots. In each one, the composition shows the relationship between two characters and the obstacle between them. While some act as foreshadowing, others emphasise the external or underlying conflicts of scenes. and through the repetitive use of this composition, rhyming scenes with one another just like in Raising Arizona, a series of expectations is built up, which, once we progress into the film, once the drama and the zombie-fueled insanity is cranked up, we see the same shot composition, only now the obstacle is immediate, the emotional consequences are severe, and the effect is devastating. So, the camera is used to enhance drama, cool, but Shaun of the Dead is a comedy, and Simon Pegg quoted that, in Raising Arizona, there were jokes in how the camera moved. So did Wright and Pegg fulfill those promises?
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
I know he's your best friend, but you do live with him.
I know.
It's not that I don't like Ed. Ed, it's not that I don't like you.
Sorry?
In a word, yes. Instead of establishing the relational context of the film, Wright chooses to not tell the audience the full context of a scene. What is out of the frame can be just as important and just as funny as what is in the frame. As you can see, a synergy arises between the editing, the shot composition, and the dialogue. And again, this is the beginning of a rhyming scheme, as we see it again, and again. Imagine the opposite of Hitchcock's Bomb Under the Table. Instead of letting the audience know more than the characters for the sake of tension, he lets the characters know more than the audience for the sake of comedy. So, we have established how Wright and Pegg took inspiration from Raising Arizona to tell jokes with the camera as well as with the script. But how did they balance that comedy with horror? As Robert McKee states, in comedy, there is one overriding convention that unites this mega genre and distinguishes it from drama. Nobody gets hurt. Well, they ignored Mr. McKee. But the addition of death and gore doesn't create an effective horror movie. The effectiveness of a genre film is based upon how it toys with the limitations and conventions of said genre, and thus, Wright and Pegg were faced with a dilemma. The audience is already a genre expert. It enters each film armed with a complex set of anticipations learned through a lifetime of moviegoing. The genre sophistication of filmgoers presents the writer with this critical challenge. He must not only fulfill audience anticipations, or risk their confusion and disappointment, but he must lead their expectations to fresh, unexpected moments, or risk boring them. So how did they fulfill audience anticipations? Blood, gore, zombies, simple. But again, two-dimensional. Leading their expectations to fresh, unexpected moments, that's the third dimension. For an example, how many times have we seen this in a horror movie? But in Shaun of the Dead, we get this.
You do know the front door was open again last night.
We are grounded in the ordinary, the horror is pulled away when we expect it. But what we now expect is this scene's dancing partner, the couplet needs completing. So do they fulfill audience anticipations and give us horror, or do we get a fresh comedic moment? We get both. We get naked zombies. It can be argued that the very existence of horror and comedy creates a duality that can only subvert the conventions of one another. But Wright and Pegg were able to meld the two together through the patterns in the camera work and the script, and the ordinary people reacting to the extraordinary situations. The characters are so ordinary, in fact, that for our protagonist Shaun, ordinary life is the greatest horror of all. As stated earlier, he begins the film as an unfulfilled everyman, spectrally wandering through suburban life. And that life prods him, pokes him, tries to force change within him, change that frightens him. It is ordinary life that he must overcome. So how do we see this change within him? Through another Coen Brothers technique, callback.
Okay then.
The idea of cyclical dialogue is beyond what you remember. It is beyond
got red on you. It develops symptoms similar to those displayed by their attack.
Oh, you've got red on you.
Yeah.
Instead, it is used to exacerbate
What does that mean?
It means to make things worse.
the drama as well as the comedy. It is used to show not only how Shaun begins to listen to Liz,
If we don't, they'll come up here and they'll tear us to pieces, and that is really going to exacerbate things for all of us.
but how Ed begins to listen to Shaun.
Any zombies out there?
Don't say that. What? That? What? That? The Z word, don't say it.
Don't you want anymore? In a minute you'll be just another zombie. Don't say that! We're not using the Z word!
As a result, they both become the men they need to be and complete their positive change arcs. Whilst this dialogue serves as a function of closing the gaps shown between them in the shots earlier in the film, Wright and Pegg improve upon the notion of cyclical dialogue in Raising Arizona by showing change with the camera too, by showing that Shaun is finally grasping life by the hog lumps. There's an old idiom in art that says, originality is dead. Our current cinematic landscape, littered with remakes, sequels and franchises, is a testament to that belief. And in some ways, Shaun of the Dead is just another example, its title literally paying homage to its inspiration. Whilst the idea of a zombie apocalypse is familiar to the audience, the mode in which Wright and Pegg told it is alien, taking their stylistic inspiration from Raising Arizona, a film that Pegg described as a
This is like a living, breathing Looney Tunes cartoon in every way.
although on the surface it seems like a strange connection. Shaun of the Dead is living proof of Jean-Luc Godard's quote, "It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to." By using callback humour and repeated composition, they show change. By setting up a horror trope, they reverse expectations and enforce comedy. And by rhyming the camera and the dialogue, they created the stylistic building blocks for a trilogy that is not bound by plot, but by poetry. By poetry, I mean fruit machines, fingers, fences, and of course,
Cornetto.
thank you for watching. Remember, if you don't like this video,